Yep, ready to roll.
Good. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this town hall, this virtual town hall, and thanks to the people who submitted questions ahead of time or concerns, and especially thanks to everybody who are making the event possible. I'll try to keep my remarks brief to allow more time for comments by the commanders and for the questions and answers. The focus of this town hall is once again on where we stand on accomplishing our mission under the COVID-19 situation. And of course, our purpose is to pass along the latest information we have and address questions and concerns. Once again, I'd encourage everybody to keep yourselves informed by visiting the other official information sources, the websites from OSD, the Air Force, the Personnel Center, here at Wright-Patt, and of course our own AFIT website. When we get new information, it certainly is posted on those various sites. On that score, the guidance continues to evolve as the situation changes, as we learn more about the virus, and we identify opportunities to adapt and improve our operational effectiveness under these conditions. For example, earlier this week, the Secretary of Defense directed development of clearer, more liberal leave policy, and he has requested that revised policy memo for his signature by tomorrow, so we expect to get additional guidance from the Secretary of Defense over the weekend. As a result of discussions with the Secretary of Defense, we also might see increased availability of testing as a result of their assessment that Air Force-wide, at any rate, we have increased capability to do that, but it's up to each installation commander to assess their own capability to do that, so that also may be an additional resource we have. The Chief of Staff earlier directed that the force be postured to achieve at least 80% of its pre-COVID operational capability and to be at least at the 80% mark by the end of June here, so getting close to that. We have looked at ourselves and subjectively judged that actually we, in terms of how one might measure capability and capacity and so forth, that we exceed that 80% thing, largely through the great work of many of you folks out there who have adapted courses and other activities to deal with the current situation. We've actually had to cancel relatively few course offerings in that regard, and those, as you might expect, are related to courses that had classified content in there, and we simply could not do that by effectively in an online manner. So we're actually, I think, in pretty good shape relative to what the Chief of Staff has asked for. We also expect every 2 weeks the installation commander has a meeting with the leaders from all of the organizations across Wright-Patterson. Another one of those meetings is scheduled for this afternoon. It'll be the first one with the new installation commander, Colonel Miller. So we'll be interested to see what he has to share this afternoon. So if we have more substantive information, we'll certainly get that out to everybody as soon as we learn it. In terms of the current situation, we remain in HPCon Charlie and under a public health emergency declaration by the installation commander. We also remain in phase 1 of the installation commander's 3-phase reconstitution plan. And I think, as most of you know, under phase 1, we are limited to having on campus no more than about 20% of our assigned strength, and gatherings of individuals are generally restricted to 10 people or less, and of course, maintaining physical separation, and where that separation can't be maintained, wearing face coverings and so forth. And under phase 1, And actually going forward, and this is consistent with the Secretary of Defense's guidance, we still are in a situation where telework remains the default here, and so we're in that situation now. I have no official word yet on a forecast of when the installation commander will declare a transition to the phase 2, in which we could bring on campus as many as 50% if we see the need to do that. And I think gatherings can be up to 50 people at that point, so it's a much more liberal situation. But I don't have any real reliable information as to when we might transition to phase 2 or prepare for that. And hopefully we'll hear something this afternoon. I'm guessing we're probably still a couple of weeks out from that, but we'll see. Meanwhile, the deans and the directors, with the help of many of you, are actively planning for that transition to phase 2. So that's kind of where we sit there. There has been a lot of information in the last week or so about the Secretary of Defense's stop movement order, which remains in effect in general. And as you know, when it was revised to go to a condition-based transition, it's a two-step deal. First, the OSD has to declare a state as a whole meeting certain conditions and put on a so-called green list. And right now, there are with the exception of 5 states, at least as of yesterday, with the exception of 5 states, all the rest, including Ohio, have now met that precondition. And so then what happens in the second part of the decision is that installations within a green state, like Ohio, installations that have more than 1,000 people assigned, then they have to meet certain conditions that say they are ready to accept and support unrestricted travels in and out. The first part of the installation requirement is that they must declare transition from health HP Con Charlie to Bravo. That has not yet been done here at Wright-Patterson, so that's kind of step 1. And related to that, we can talk more about this. Within the past week, there has been revised guidance issued here at AFIT, and more guidance from the Air Force, and as I said, I expect to hear more from the Secretary of Defense level this weekend on leave approval beyond the local area. And the situation we're in now, at least as I understand it as of last night, the current situation is that at least from the Secretary's level, if an individual is moving from going on leave and transitioning between states, and they're going from a green state to a green state, which is most of them, unless you're going up to Michigan, which is one of the few red states left. If you're going between a green and a green, it is no longer required to have a general officer sign that leave approval. The leave approval is at the normal approval level, and that's kind of where we anticipated going, and I think that'll be ratified here shortly. So that's good news, because people have recognized, in fact, the Secretary of Defense was advised by other senior leaders that his current leave policy was not clear, it was confusing and overly restrictive. And so hopefully we're going to get some relief there, and we have already moved in that direction. I would tell you that the situation in Ohio remains concerning in terms of number of cases and deaths. We're on a good trend, but this is going to be with us for quite some time to some level, and so we need to plan accordingly in that regard. I track the transition of the deltas day to day, and there's still the number of cases is still on the order of 500 plus new cases every day. But that can be misleading because we also have significantly ramped up the amount of testing going on, and so what is perhaps a much better indicator of the trend is the number of deaths that can be reasonably attributed to the virus, and that number has shown a steady and persistent downward trend, so that's good news. But until we get a vaccine, which is probably not the earliest, I think, CDC projects is by the end of this year at the very earliest, this is going to be a challenge for us. Here at AFIT, we have tested a total of 12 people. 3 people have tested positive and 9 negative. However, of the 9 negative, 5 were still presumed to be positive. So in the aggregate, 8 of our 12 tested people were either confirmed or presumed to be positive. And currently, we've got two people who have tested positive remain in quarantine, both civilian institution students. And the last report I got was that they are both doing well, but of course they're in quarantine for the 14 days, etc. So within Ohio, at the present time, most businesses and activities have been reopened, but with some restrictions, as I'm sure many of you have already noted. The K through 12 schools, stadiums, arenas, and some other things remain closed, and so that is still yet to be determined by the Ohio government. I want to emphasize that here at Wright-Patterson, as a federal installation, we are certainly informed by what the state is doing and what our communities are doing, but we are not obligated to follow their lead. They're making decisions based on different criteria, in particular what's best for the people and what's best for the economy. We're making a decision on what's best for the people and what's best for the mission. Let me conclude by observing that, as I said, COVID is likely to be with us for quite some time, and we need to plan accordingly. And we need to practice what we teach in the sense of operational risk management and making decisions under uncertainty. These are things that we teach our students all the time, and the current situation, while certainly problematic, is a kind of a pretty decent case study on both of those issues. We need to continue to make what I would argue data-informed decisions that balance risk to the mission and risk to our people. And when I say people, that's students, staff, faculty, and our families. And especially people within those groups or subgroups that are at high risk, whether because of health conditions or age or whatever. And finally, I want to say, as we work our way through this, folks, the goal is not to come out of this situation and return to the way we were before. The goal is to come out of this thing, learn from all of the things we've done here, and come out better. Okay? I don't know what that looks like yet. I've got some feedback that suggests where we've learned some lessons that will put us in even more productive, more effective, more responsive shape when we don't have to worry about the pandemic. So I want to emphasize that point. Our future should not necessarily look exactly like our past. And so we've done some marvelous things in terms of innovation, and so we want to learn from that, and as we go forward and get this behind us at some point, that we not just return to where we were before, but return to a better place. So with that, I'll quiet and invite Colonel Condoleezza to offer his remarks. Sir?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stewart, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. And so I kind of want to pick up where Dr. Stewart left off, but also circle back to kind of the first town hall and kind of give you the mindset of where I'm at. And it's really the prevent, contain, and continue to operate. And I would propose to you that as we move through the phases, a continuum, if you will, that prevent, contain, and continue to operate will vary, and also move through a continuum. And so as one example would be the leave policy, as it adjusts and adapts. And as we go from green state to green state, I don't want folks to lose sight of that the biological threat still exists. I mean, if you peel back on the methodology used for green, you know, it's out there, but again, some green states still have high case counts. And so that's where, even if you travel to a green state, don't lose sight of the fact that you still have to prevent, contain, and continue to operate. And that's where some of the countermeasures that you'll see to try to do that when we come up on the leave policy. The other piece is the social connectedness piece, and that was kind of introduced as a second order effect. As we kind of went through the initial phase 0 and kind of isolating ourselves. So I want to emphasize the social connectedness, and that is still important to continue to figure out the resiliency piece and the social connectedness piece. Again, it is a continuum. It does evolve. It does vary as we go through that. You heard Dr. Stewart mention the leaders are looking at how to do phase 2. Right, and they're doing it with that prevent, contain, and continue to operate in mind to meet the mission. So, and that's really I just want folks to continue to focus on that the biological threat still exists, and so you have to move through a continuum of prevent, contain, and continuing to operate. And so with that, I'll quiet now and want to turn it over to Colonel Liljeburg to start with the questions and facilitating the question answers. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'd like to give a quick thanks to SC, Kristen Robinson, and Danny Berry first for making these town halls possible. First question is for SC Major Froming. It is frustrating to have to set up a profile on Outlook from scratch over and over again when logging onto VDI. It has been reported to SC. Please can we get this fixed for good? Sir, I'm not having this issue, but other members of the team are running into this challenge.
This is Major Daryl Froming, the SC Director. Thank you for the question. Currently, SC is aware of the issue, and we have been engaging with the vendor. Without providing too much IT speak for the team at large, the issues we believe are with the vendor's persona management software, and SC is working possible solutions. Currently, I don't have a get well date or an estimated completion date, but we are engaging with the vendor.
Dr. Stewart, what is meant by your comments that we shouldn't let a crisis go to waste?
Well, I appreciate that question as well, and really it's something that I've talked about before, as have our more senior leaders, including especially the Chief of Staff. And simply what I'm talking about there is what I just mentioned. As a result of this crisis, we've begun to learn some lessons that we can do things differently, in some cases more effectively, and that we need to learn from those experiences and take advantage of that. And let me give you an example. There's a cell of people here that work in the cyber area. They're mostly contractor folks, but it turns out that because of, and I don't want to throw our own FC guys under the bus because this is not their issue, but it turns out that these folks in their mission are actually a bit more effective working from off campus on their own computers and doing the kind of software development and so forth that they have to do than in some cases they were when they were working out of space here on campus within our own system. And so there's just a very tactical example that said going forward, if that's really the case, that this cell of individuals, of contractor teammates, is really more productive in doing their particular mission, working off campus, then certainly, as I just implied in my comments earlier, going forward post-pandemic, why would we not want them to continue to stay off campus if they're more productive? Lesson learned. And so that's really what the chief meant, what I meant and have expressed a couple times, is the notion that these forcing functions, I don't know whether you'd call it a crisis, this one is certainly significant, forces us to look at things differently, become more, it's an incentivizing function. So that there's no hidden agenda as something else going on other than let's learn from the experience, take advantage of those lessons, and move forward as we work our way through this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Colasso, can we please get clarification on what constitutes as essential work? It appears more and more we're being asked to come into work for tasks that do not appear to be essential. Also, what is the proper way to go about rebutting these requests due to health concerns?
Okay, so let me go back in time a little bit. And first of all, our mission was declared essential by the AETC commander, and so that came with it certain exceptions to policy and authorities, right? So our overall mission was determined to be essential. So from that, you can infer that pretty much, and Dr. Stewart just mentioned this early on, that all our activities that drive mission success in terms of student production, research, consultation. Are really essential activities, right? And so all our activities are essential. So now the question in my mind becomes, can you do that in a telework status or remotely? Can you do it on site, either on the AFIT campus or in a TDY status? And it's really that modality that might be the question here of essential, right? And so, the concept, and again, it varies. As we go through each phase, we go through that prevent, contain, continue to operate, the countermeasures that are available to us, and so at the tactical level, it's really the supervisors that kind of have to determine those activities and where those activities need to be conducted. And so, which is a segue into the other part of that question, is I hope you resolve those differences at the supervisory level, and then using the chain of command moving up. But with that, there are a host of venues that are available to discuss and resolve differences on that. And so I would refer folks to their supervisor, their chain of command, or to HR. For those tougher, more challenging situations. Thanks.
Okay, next question is for Colonel Fee. In May, EN designated summer courses as either 1, must be in person, 2, in-person preferred, or 3, ready for remote modality. When we return to work as an organization, what approval is required to move a course in category 2 or 3 to in-person modality?
So thanks for the question. Thanks for the Dean. Let me address this. I've been doing the mission planning for how do we do the summer quarter, what courses need to be on campus, what are some of the things that we need to think about. So the standard federal government answer here, it depends, is the best answer. It really depends upon what Dr. Stewart mentioned at the beginning, is if the base moves into phase 2, that allows us to bring more courses onto the campus. If the base doesn't move into phase 2, then we're still restricted to the 20%. And so it kind of depends on the timing of that. That said, what we set out to plan was, if you recall, back in April, we had to push all of the courses off campus. And part of that decision was there were some courses that were lab courses that needed to be held on campus, but we pushed those to the summer quarter. So now we had to plan for which summer courses must be face-to-face. We've planned those. With those courses and the research that we have on campus now, when the summer quarter begins, if we're still in phase 1 for the basis guidance, that pretty much eats up all of the ceiling that we have on how many folks we can have on campus. If we move into phase 2, then we have a little bit more ceiling where we can bring some courses on that are preferred. If that happens, I would advise that if you are scheduled to teach a DL class and you have a good justification, bring that up to your department head if you'd like to request that be held on campus and that you could meet requirements better. And I would also advise that you, if you're a faculty member, I don't know whether this came from faculty or student, but if you're a faculty member, discuss with your students what problems that might present to them. Because we've got to be sensitive to the students as well, but if they're ready to receive that course in a DL mode and they don't have childcare lined up and those sorts of things that are still a challenge, that transitioning quickly to on campus may present a problem to them. So a lot of that planning would have to go on, but I certainly encourage the flexibility that if we have that ceiling, and if you as a faculty member feel that you can deliver a better course and can provide that justification, then raise that concern to your department head and we'll address those courses one by one. For now, we've planned all of the face-to-face courses to be, the face-to-face courses, I think it's about 15 to 20 last count on campus for summer quarter. That schedule should be coming out in the next week or so. And then we have a few courses that are scheduled for face-to-face that were preferred as long as we go to phase 2. If we don't go to phase 2, then we'll only have the musts on campus for next quarter. Thank you for the question.
Let me pile on a little bit. Under phase 1, we're limited to 20% of our people on campus at any one point in time. Okay, and so the notion being, if, you know, this is, if you want to get beyond that, and this is a faculty member asking a question, teach your course at night. There's plenty of headroom then. The other thing that I want to emphasize too is that don't forget that the other part of the condition that we're under right now is gatherings are limited to 10 people or less. If you have a class that has 15 people registered for it, we're going to need to, and we're still under phase 1, we're going to have to request some kind of waiver. I don't think that's going to necessarily be a problem in the overall scheme of things, but in order to to be compliant with the policy, that's still something we have to take care of. But as Colonel Fee mentioned, if when we transition into phase 2, that'll give us a lot more flexibility. So we'll just, but you know, that's up to the installation commander to make that call. And I would tell you that at last count, while if I looked across all the DoD installations, most of them are in green states, but most of the DoD installations remain in a red status, if you will. They have not yet declared HPCon Bravo. I would just make those 2 points. The 20% is a binding constraining aggregate, but tactically, if we can work through the details, I think we have operational headroom there. Thank you.
Okay, next question is for Dean Badiro. Within AFIT-EN, we've heard comments relayed that spring quarter of remote modality was successful, so we should increase our DL offerings. Such an assessment only considers whether education stopped, not the degree to which students were able to successfully achieve learning outcomes. Before any claim is made of remote education as unqualified success, would AFIT consider a school-specific survey to get both student and faculty feedback on the remote modality? I think you'd find student views are very informative. Until such feedback is obtained, it would be better to consider remote education as an emergency measure rather than the start of something new and enduring.
Thank you for that question. The question has several components that I will address structurally. First, I want to clarify in no uncertain terms that DL is not our default mode of operation. We are established and we're resourced for in-resident teaching. We use DL as an enhancement, as a way to expand our offerings beyond the main campus. We also use DL in response to the emergency created by COVID-19. So I want to make sure that we all understand that we are engaged in DL right now, not because we're thinking of moving towards a DL delivery of education. Now, in terms of the success, success is a value judgment. In geometric terms, if you are charged from moving from point A to point B, and you complete that journey, then you say you have a success. Now, the perception of how well the completion was done, that's a different thing. That's where the value judgment comes in. And to be able to aggregate the quality of how well we complete the movement from A to B, we'll have to require some kind of survey of the recipients of the education that we deliver through DL. And that's where the student feedback will come in. And of course, different students experience different things in different courses with different professors. So it will take quite a lot of aggregating to really assess whether we can make a statement a general statement about the success of DL. But like I said, we responded to an emergency situation. We did not scamper into a hole. We did not withdraw off stage. We continued to deliver education, and the avenue for doing that was DL. So that's how we got into the DL mode for this current session. So going forward, we will aggregate the success based on student feedback and then be able to engage in continuous improvement of how we do DL. In my vision, DL will continue to be a part of what we do because that is the direction that education itself is going. And it's an opportunity for us to continue to take our programs to those who need the program, who might not be able to be with us physically. So it's a mode of operation that eventually will engage in as a hybrid delivery of education. So I hope that clarifies that. Quality is the other question that we're going to address in a different question later on. Okay?
I would add that right now, or at least in the fall, we'll have roughly about 1,000 people enrolled in our programs here, but about a third of those people are part-time students for whom the DL is their default mode. Okay, so as the dean rightly points out, it's a matter of using various delivery modes in a discriminating fashion and for different populations and who have different constraints. So it's not one size fits all for sure, but I also want people to appreciate that, you know, when we fight for resources, folks, we typically say, well, we need more money, we need more manpower for faculty and staff. The first thing we need is students. And so to the extent that we can take advantage of DL technology to serve more people, as the dean points out, that are not, don't have the opportunity to come here in residence, we need to look at that part of the Air Force as well. But I would agree that our default position certainly for the in-resident full-time students is the way we normally do business. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Colonel Fee, what is the plan for onboarding new faculty to AFIT and AFIT-EN, specifically with regard to previous course development workshops that have been very helpful?
So I was actually just, thanks for the question. I was actually just talking to Dr. Betsy Grimes, our Director for Faculty Development, this week about this. She has begun the planning to do all of that faculty development, or faculty orientation, which includes a week of orientation and then another week of how-to guides on building classes and that sort of thing. She had began to plan all of that for via virtual. I posed a question to her. This is going to occur in September. A lot can change between now and then. And I said, you know, you should also consider what would it look like to hold that in person. Some of the factors that depend there are if we're in phase 2, and also we don't know we don't have the full list of faculty yet, so I don't know how many faculty that's going to be. If it's 10 or 12, that gives us a lot more options than if it's 25. So we're kind of planning that now. It's a little ways off, but she plans to, she already had a great plan for how she was going to sequence it out, all to do it virtually. So she's got a good plan there. And then I put on her to-do list was, hey, also look at options of what room we might use here on campus and how we could spread some folks out. The other thing she would have to plan is how to bring all the speakers in, because there's quite a few speakers that come through. All the heads, all 6 department heads also speak during that time. So there's a lot of moving parts, but she was going to look at both. Some more to come on that, but there will be, either way, there will be a 2-week orientation for new faculty, and that'll be sometime during the middle of September. Thanks for the question.
Colonel Cavalesso, can AFIT leadership share the progress of the search for the new Chief Academic Officer / Provost, as well as the vision for how that role will evolve from its previous incarnation?
Did we lose the colonel? If not,
Sir, we can't hear you. He's
Oh, yes, sir. Nope, I'm here. Sorry, forgot to unmute. So two-part question. What I'll do is I'll answer the first part, and then I'll ask Dr. Stewart to answer the second part and share his vision of the position. So for the chief academic officer, it's going through kind of a traditional process, except it's an SCS equivalent position. So there are certain requirements that we have to follow. So, but with that, there's going to be an evaluation of the resumes. And then interviews, and then the final selection. And I can tell the team here that we're in the resume evaluation phase of the process, and so we're hoping to enter the interview phase sometime in July, August, with the final selection hopefully being at the end of August, beginning of September. And so that's kind of the process, the phases we're in with the candidates, the applicants, if you will, going from there. And with that, I'd like to turn it over part two to Dr. Stewart.
just a bit about the process. This position is identified in law and requires that the final blessing, it's being treated as an SCS position, even though it's not officially part of the senior executive service. And what that means is that we are in a recommending position to the Major Commander, Lieutenant General Webb. He in turn recommends to the Secretary of the Air Force, who must make the final approval. Though normally that's pretty perfunctory, but it does take a bit of extra time. Now, to the point of the focus of it, when we looked at this position, particularly in the wake of the experiences we had initially with this position, I made the decision is that this position should be consistent with the Chief Academic Officer responsibilities of the Chief Academic Officer at headquarters AETC and at headquarters Air University. And what that means for us is that this position is an advisory position, does not have direct reports, if you will. In that sense, it is different than what you might see at a civilian university. Here, because we are a government organization, the deans and the directors do not report to the chief academic officer in a line sense. The role of the chief academic officer is to advise, to help us make better decisions with respect to the full spectrum of academic issues. That's curriculum and faculty qualifications and academic policies and so forth. So we revised the position description to reflect that, and so the consistency with the duties and responsibilities of chief academic officers at Air University and AETC, and so that's where that stands. And so it's a bit different. It's a senior advisory position that gives counsel to me, to the deans and directors on issues of academic significance. I also hold that individual responsible in that regard to be our senior leader, if you will, on issues tied to accreditation and reaccreditation, both with respect to regional accreditation through the Higher Learning Commission and program accreditation in the graduate school through ABET. So that in a nutshell is a situation with respect to our expectations of this position and the process of it. Colonel Catalesso, did I miss anything?
No, sir, that covers it well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next question is for Major Froming. The Air University version of MS Teams works great from home. It's not working for web conferencing or web calls from computers on the AFIT network. As a result, so long as students aren't in the classroom, faculty teaching remote offerings via MS Teams are only functional if they do so from home. Can we make Teams web calls work when on the AFIT network?
Thank you. I'll try to talk a little bit slower. I'm on my third cup of coffee. As of right now, the web calls feature will work for other EDU users in the Teams desktop app. if it's connected to a personal network, wired or wireless, or the AFIT Wi-Fi. Currently, the EDU network does not allow some features, such as video and the call functions. The EDU network connectivity has been looked at for resolution, but is still being worked at by the AU and SC team.
Thanks, sir. Next question is for you as well. Can we purchase USB webcams for temporary student use with their personal computers? The purpose is health and welfare. A few students either don't have them or have broken cameras, and it's important for faculty to see their students to better evaluate how they are doing. High stress is typically visible before it's audible.
Webcams, as it stands right now, are permissible, but the demand signal would have to come from the respective two-letter or schoolhouse. The government furnished equipment needs to have a requirement much like a textbook. If it is required for the course, then it should be listed in the syllabus and thus provided by the school. That being said, there are currently no restrictions for students, staff, or faculty from purchasing a webcam on a personally owned device.
GFE though.
Next question is for all the schools. Not every concern is an AFIT-wide concern. Can we have school-specific online town hall meetings like this with discussions specific to the needs of each school? I know that LS, EN, and CI are already doing this. Uncertain about EX and CE. So I'll turn over to maybe Dr. Aston or Lieutenant Colonel Howell. But Colonel Narasaki, does EX have any plans for this?
Yeah, Colonel Narasaki here. We can do that. I do have a fairly small unit. We are in communication with all of our teammates, but certainly possible if the demand signal is there.
Great. Next question is for Dean Badiro. AFIT EN has always provided in-residence education of the highest quality and of incredible relevance to the customer, the Air Force, the DoD, and our students. While we have DL programs, both degree and certificate, these are really lower tier in terms of quality. The EN leadership position seems quite amenable to moving into a DL modality, and with it, the loss of the very research component that has continued to save the EN as an institution time and time again. What is the EN position in terms of delivery priority? Is it DL or is it in residence, particular since our faculty and support positions here were established for the in-residence mission and not for a DL delivery mode?
Thank you for that question, which is actually related to the previous question. First, I want to refute the idea that DL is lower tier in terms of quality. That is not a universal statement at all. Quality is in the perception of the recipient of the product. And when you have a large body of recipients, you have different comments about the recipient's perception of the quality. And again, like I said before, the success and quality in a particular course depends on what the specific program is, the specific instructor, the specific time of day, the specific enrollment. So many factors come into play when defining the quality of delivery. So what we're doing in EN, now that we're actively engaged in DL for the spring quarter, is to collect the data post-spring quarter to see an assessment of the different comments that we get from the students. And those students will give us the guidance as to what we need to tweak in the way we deliver DL courses. Again, there is no universal assessment of quality of courses, but we should recognize that AFIT is not a virtual campus. We have a physical campus. And I said that before, and I'll say it again, we are resourced to be here and host in-resident students. But we cannot rest on that alone. We must continually expand our offerings. And the best way to do that is through DL. Will the quality always be the same? No. Are we going to be making efforts in continual improvement of quality of delivery of DL? Yes. And that improvement will depend on data that we continue to collect. And we are collecting data even as we speak for the spring quarter. So again, I wanted to clarify that DL is not our default mode. It's an enhancement to our regular in-resident offering. Okay.
Colonel Littleberg, Colonel Cottle, I'd like to circle back on the previous question on town halls at the school-specific level. We have some other deans and representatives. I'd like to give Colonel Randall from LS a chance to respond, and Dr. Aston. And for the group, though, keep in mind that Colonel Brown from CI, as well as Colonel McQuaid, does those forums for their portfolio. So over to you, Colonel Randall.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So for the School of Systems and Logistics, we recognize the value of forums such as this for sharing, especially that school-specific information as it relates to COVID impacts on LS and where we're headed in the future. Our Dean, Colonel Kapnick, has hosted one town hall already in May. And although we don't have the next set in stone on the calendar, the LS team can expect our next town hall to take place in mid-July. So stand by for details on that. Thanks, sir.
Sounds good. Dr. Aston, are you able to communicate? If you could.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. This is Dr. Aston.
Due
to our mission, our student body is constantly rotating. So we don't necessarily do what we call a town hall, but we do what we call a dean's call. We had one a couple of weeks ago, and we're in the process of scheduling one for next week, where we bring all the faculty together to have a similar type of discussion to this. But we just don't do the students because that student body is changing from week to week. So.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'd like to turn over to
Let me also comment on that. For our student body, we do that regularly, as Colonel McQuaid does. And normally, we do the dean's call, just as CE does. It's just that that process has been disrupted now that we are in this lockdown situation. And we regularly have dean's call like every 3 months. And we will continue to do that. We may now have to move that to a virtual environment. So plans are already there for us to bring everybody together. Even though students are having their calls with the dean of students, the dean's call overall brings everybody together. But to supplement that, we're constantly communicating via email, which is a tool of communication in our STEM environment these days. And we use that frequently to bring everybody together. And further, we have a weekly EN heads meeting, which we've been doing virtually. We've not missed one since we went to lockdown. Through this avenue, information is shared with the department heads, who then promote that within their respective units. So it's a two-tier process in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Back over to you, Colonel Littleberg. Thank you.
Yes, sir. As we continue, next question for Major Froming. As we continue to telework, most everyone will continue to avoid the incredible headache that is called VDI. Many faculty do not have Adobe Pro on their home machines, so must tolerate a time-consuming, extremely slow VDI session to be able to digitally sign various forms. Can EN work with SC to get licenses for Adobe Pro so that we can digitally sign the various forms we work with, like PA approval forms and ESSS, et cetera?
All right, thank you. That question has two parts. The first part I'll address, which is VDI. So VDI in its current configuration was not installed to handle the current surge of 900% increase in usage. SC has taken on-site resources to beef up its capability, but in its current, it is not optimized at this point. There's an ongoing effort to gather requirements for the upcoming school year that would allow AFIT to receive additional support from the vendor. But keep in mind that SC does not have control over an individual's hardware outside of government laptops. or their personal internet connection, in which these are also important factors in the use of the system and its performance. Lastly, there is always new cyber threats in which SC will always be reactive to. Case in point is recently there's been a new threat vector that has impacted VDI operations, and SC is responding to that at the same time as the rest of the IT world. Secondly, with regards to Adobe Pro, Adobe Pro is not necessary to digitally sign documents, as Adobe Reader demands less system resources and is available on all VDI images. Our current Adobe licensing also would not allow installation on personally owned devices for Adobe Pro. EN buying Adobe Pro for personally owned devices may need JA approval. Thank you.
Okay, next question for Master Sergeant Barrett. With the ongoing pandemic, staff and faculty stress remains high and fatigue is increasing. However, it is recognizably much higher for students. Will AFIT please consider sharing resources and/or training to help faculty identify signs when intervention and/or referral to professional services is necessary? Most of us have previously had ACE or similar training, but the remoteness of the circumstances call for something different.
Great. So I take that as a two-part question as well. It's a great question. I'll start off with resources. I did just send out a link, and it is accessible through a non-VDI network as well, and that's to resilience.af.mil. It's a very useful link. It's got a checklist for just about any type of circumstance, and it goes through a list of things that you would look out for in a normal environment, not necessarily in a VDI environment, but some of them go hand in hand. So I'd like you to take a look at that and see if that works for you, and give me some feedback on how that works, and if it's what you're looking for. If it's not what you're looking for, just reach out to me via email or cell phone, and we'll see what we can do to kind of tailor to what your needs are. The second part of the question, I see that the online environment, I think that mental health in an online campus environment is very pertinent. It's very now. And it's something that we do need to discuss. I've been talking to Dr. Grimes about it as well, and we're working on coming up with a plan to make sure our faculty are where they need to be with that when we get busy with our online education. I think that's a great question and a great way forward. So that's something we will be working on in the future.
Thank you. Colonel Catalesso, I know it was brought up earlier on in the pandemic, but has more PT time been approved to help with the ongoing stress of the lockdown? As leaders, we should be looking for ways to de-stress the situation, not add to it. Can we please get official word on PT?
Yeah, so that was from the last town hall, and I will tell you that we got to continue to staff that one, and so we will look at that, the PT time, and see what we can do, see what's in the realm of possible, given the guidance that we're getting.
Next question, I'll send to Colonel Catalesso. If a professor holds a night class, what can students do regarding childcare and other logistical issues?
So I think it starts with the requirement. And so the earlier you can declare that requirement, then we can look at engaging the resources of the wing to support that. I will say that the CDC went through some challenging times when they try to reopen, and so they got some again in that prevent contain, they got some issues. So that's actually going to be I think a team effort to solve for that particular requirement. And so my ask would be identify it early in this phase 2 process that Colonel Fee briefed, and if you have those I'll call those ancillary support requirements. Identify those and let's see what we can do to help out.
Yes, sir. Next is
Hey, this is Colonel McQuaid. Can I jump in on that one just real quick?
Yeah, please.
So, yeah, thanks. I've been communicating to the students, and hopefully this is a student that's asking that question. Start at the lowest level. If a faculty presents that as an option to you, please communicate directly back to the faculty what challenges you may have, what obstacles you may have in meeting that requirement, and look for solutions at that point so that the faculty is fully informed on what the demographics of the students are that are attending that course. Should things not be resolved at that level, then elevate to deputy department head, and then ultimately me, so that any of those issues can be worked at that level. And at my students' calls, especially, we've talked a lot about working at that level to deal with those simple questions that can be resolved so that we don't go down a road that excludes students from being able to be part of class offerings outside of normal business hours. Thanks.
Okay, next we have a two-part question. First part for Master Sergeant Garrett. Who is the AFIT IG?
So our AFIT IG, or Inspector General, we fall under the 88th Air Base Wing. So we would refer to the AFIT IG for the 88th Air Base Wing. And I can send that out for you if you'd like.
Next part will be for Colonel Fee. I have heard comments, seen emails, and watched YouTube comments from faculty that give me the distinct impression that some faculty disdain students. The faculty members are both civilian and military. How can this be appropriately addressed?
What was the word, the disdain students?
Yes, I guess there's videos out there or YouTube comments from faculty. I'm not aware of the issue.
Okay. I haven't heard that. Certainly, if that came up in some online class or something, I would want to know about it to address it. Let me say on top of what Colonel McQuaid said, as far as the classes and the meeting the students' requirements, he and I talk almost daily about what he's hearing from the students, about what concerns they have, so that I can try to address along with the dean down to the department heads and the faculty. One of the things I said early on is if a faculty member is considering holding an online class, that I want to hear from them that they've talked with the students and they know about what concerns the students might have, what challenges they might have to be able to be available for a 5 o'clock or a 6 o'clock or a 7 o'clock class. I know that could be challenging depending on your family situation. So if any of those come up, please vote them up. I haven't heard any of them come to my level. So I certainly would address that if that's an issue, if there's something happening online. Thank you.
Next question for Dr. Stewart. There are a lot of mixed messages about the ebb and flow of COVID in our country. The administration is saying we're past it and things are getting better, while cases are skyrocketing in various states, and the country as a whole has more daily infections than ever. Is military leadership considering providing clear guidance about the state of affairs so that our members can have a clear understanding of the threat level?
I would respond to that by suggesting that this is looked at carefully within the Department of Defense, and if you go to the websites that I suggested, the Department of Defense, the Air Force, and on down the line there, I think you'll get more relevant and reliable information based on what we know. Now, keep in mind, folks, that at least the last briefing I was a party to by the medical community, there's still a lot about this virus that is unknown and unpredictable. And so you'll see some people suggest and for planning purposes, the notion that this thing, we may have another surge in the fall or the winter nationally and internationally. And we've already seen some of that. And so it varies. And so there are a variety of messages floating around out there for sure. But I would recommend that you stay focused on the official lines of communication, those websites that tell you what the situation is within the Department of Defense. And I can tell you, because we briefed these, we looked at our staff meeting with the leaders every week, that within the Department of Defense, because of the population, the general population of our members, military, civilian, contractors, etc., they are significantly different than the general national population, as you might expect. Excuse me. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff floating around out there, but my counsel to you is to look at those data sources that are relevant to DOD, and those are out there every day. I look at them every day. I look at the trends every day, etc. At this point, I can tell you, if I can recall the numbers correctly, within the entire Department of Defense, as of yesterday, the number of fatalities was 36, and in the Air Force it was 4. And so that's significantly different when normalized for the populations we're talking about than in the general population. Okay, so that would be my counsel to you, is to rely on those official DoD sources of information, because they're more relevant than what's in the general press.
Thank you, sir. It's noon. Would you like to continue with questions or answer the rest through email?
Let's go for another few minutes.
Yes, sir. Next question is for Dean Badiro. 13 people ask, why was COM 680 canceled?
Okay, COM 680 was instituted several years ago in the ENB department as a response to the writing needs of students. It is not a course that is required for any degree program. It was a service that was provided for students. And we've managed to offer it several times on and off by scraping together resources for it. We've offered it a number of times through contractual faculty from the outside. This latest cancellation was necessitated by the fact that we are under a very resource-constrained environment, not only with COVID-19, but other resource shortages. So there's a shortage of qualified faculty that we can draw from to teach the course internally, and there is a shortage of contractual avenues to contract the course out. More importantly, over the years, some departments have discovered that they could offer a comparable course within their unit to take care of their specific needs. Particularly ENY is doing that. So when we look at all of these factors across the board, we decided the best course of action now was to cancel the course. I know it might be a loss for students in terms of writing support, but this is not something that we're resourced to offer. It is not something that is required for degree completion. It's an enhancement, and we have not taken it off the board, actually. This spring, I actually tried to see how we could offer it by pulling together external resources. The resource is one thing, but finding a person to teach is also another reason. So, but the main reason that we canceled it was because it was not required for any degree completion. Konefi may have more on that. Konefi, you have something to add to that?
No, sir, that's what I was tracking as well.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Next question, maybe for Dean Reese. Is AFIT looking at revising the academic schedule to avoid students traveling home for Thanksgiving and then returning for only 2 weeks, only to have them travel again for the holidays? Would it be easier, especially if we have to quarantine for 14 days when we return from Thanksgiving, to end the quarter at Thanksgiving and start again in January?
I did have some initial discussions with Dean Badiro and Colonel Fee about that when we learned that other universities were doing that. But we do have an additional constraint here at AFIT because of the October 1 start that's necessitated for fiscal reasons. So Colonel Fee, perhaps you could address if you've looked into that any further, but to my knowledge, that October 1 constraint does bind us a bit.
That's right. Thanks, Dr. Reese. Currently we have the fall quarter starting on the 1st of October. We cannot start earlier than that because it's an FY21 start for the new students. And so that, because it's a 10-week quarter, that puts a binding constraint on being able to get all of the course hours in before Thanksgiving. Depending on where we're at this fall and what it looks like, we may have to look at different ways to do that. Maybe we, like a lot of other universities that I read about are doing, is after Thanksgiving, they'll offer the rest of that semester and they'll finish it via DL. That way they wouldn't have to come back to campus. So we may have to look at some of those things. Certainly it's something that if we remain in the environment right now that we'll have to plan for in the fall, but we don't have any plans right now to do that.
Dean Badiro, how have we done with remote learning this quarter? Are there any metrics to go by? And are there any improvements to the learning method being pursued?
As I mentioned before, we're still in the process of collecting data on the experiences for this spring quarter. The collation of those will determine what enhancement we're going to make for the future. That's what I have.
Hi, this is Colonel McQuaid. Can I jump in on that one as well? So all the students should have received a course survey. There are not specific questions in that course survey that speak to DL. I'm currently working to generate a survey I've taken for action this morning based on this question and other discussion about generating a specific survey for the distance learning modality for your courses. You should receive that survey hopefully within the next couple of days. I will generate a couple of specific questions based on the data that we're looking to assess. And then, of course, there'll be open-ended questions that will allow for opinion and or specific example acknowledgement. And that will come through me as a single point of contact, and I'll route that up to the dean so he has the data moving forward. Thank you.
Colonel Catalesso, speaking of the AFIT parking lot, the lines are barely visible, which was an issue for students and faculty during the school year. Can we take advantage of the vacancy to redo the parking lot?
Yeah, I'll put the request in with facilities, and hopefully we can get the CE group to respond to that. Thanks for the observation.
Yes, sir. We'll make note. We have 12 more questions, but we'll respond to the rest of those through writing.
Folks, I want to thank everybody for not only the questions, but our teammates here for responding to those questions. We will continue to hold these sessions and take advantage of other opportunities to communicate, whether by email or whatever, to keep the information flowing as we get it. And at least lately, as I've mentioned, it's been changing every 24 to 48 hours. But we'll try to keep up with it and keep you all informed as best we can. But thank you for the questions. And I encourage you to, you don't have to wait for these town halls to ask the questions. If you have questions, you can filter them up through the chain of command, and we'll try to get you an answer. And if we have it, and if we don't, we'll tell you we don't have it, and tell you what the situation is. But thank you all for taking advantage of this. I appreciate it very much. And again, for everything the whole team is doing to keep our essential mission going forward while doing what we can to protect our folks and their families. So thanks very much. We're out here.
Your call will be disconnected.